Hello and welcome back to Film on High. This is Decca,
This is Alex.
and today the film that we're going to review is Dark City, a neo-noir science fiction thriller type of film directed by Alex Proyas, starring Rufus Sewell, Kiefer Sutherland, Jennifer Connelly, Richard O'Brien, Ian Richardson, and William Hurt. So this story is about a man called John Murdoch. He wakes up in a hotel not remembering anything about his past or who he is, finding himself in a room with a dead body, and now he's being accused of murder, of being actual serial killer. And so he ventures out into the city trying to figure out who he is and what's going on. But underneath the surface of the city goes an even darker plot, you could say. And all of it has to do with, can he figure out before it's too late? So what do you think about this film?
Well, this is an example of one of the great modern films that sort of slipped through the cracks and didn't really get the respect it deserved in a lot of ways. This is a film that came out around 1998. I think it was right around that. Like, originally it was supposed to come out in 97, but I think it got held back, or maybe they were still working on it because the studio ended up fucking with it. And yeah, it's this really kind of great sci-fi concept, very visually striking, very kind of a different kind of sensibility than what was popular at the time, maybe a more baroque sensibility, or going back to the more classic sci-fi, like movies like Metropolis and stuff, favoring a more kind of, almost you could say, like vintage sci-fi style without being cheesy, and blending it with this kind of old school film noir aesthetic and using these really elevated ideas. So you got this really great concept, really great idea, great screenplay with Alex Proyas, who had done The Crow a few years before. So he had already kind of established himself as a really strong director visually. And they make the movie, they screen it, and I guess it didn't really test that well. So the studio ended up going back and doing some additions, and one of the most controversial things was, originally in the first cut of the film, there's an opening monologue that basically spoils the whole mystery and everything going forward, and that's something Alex Proyas ended up correcting later in his director's cut. But anyway, I guess the studio kind of got cold feet. They didn't know how to handle the movie, and it came out, and it wasn't like a total failure. It made its budget back, but just that, like it just grossed just enough, wasn't really a hit, and even a lot of the critics were confused by it, with the notable exception of Roger Ebert, who absolutely adored and championed the film and spoke very highly of it. And another thing that unfortunately happened was, very shortly after that, The Matrix came out, which is a film that is in many ways uncannily similar to this one, with certain concepts and ideas that it's playing with. And The Matrix being the kind of big, like, cultural, like, phenomenon that it was, I think it dwarfed Dark City and took a lot of its praise away. So yeah, it's great to come back and look at this film and see it for what it is. It's a fantastic, visually striking, very intelligent, very kind of well plotted film. You can tell that it was the result of a lot of thought, there were a lot of drafts of the script. They were kind of really working on these ideas. Originally, it was going to be more from the detective's point of view, and it was going to be more of kind of a take on film noir, and he was kind of going to go insane trying to solve this case, which is something that's kind of featured in the film with the other character, the partner, who's sort of going crazy by figuring out all these things. Mm-hmm. So it evolved from there and kind of changed and went through different permutations along the way. And I really think it's a great film. Like, it's a film that developed a serious kind of cult audience, even though, like, it wasn't very well received. And, well, it wasn't poorly received, but it just kind of was somewhat middling. Like, I feel like this is a movie that should have made a stronger impression, but I guess maybe people's heads really weren't into it, because it is sort of a challenging film in a way. Like, it drops you into the deep end, and it takes a while to sort of figure out what's going on. But that's one of the strengths of it, and that's why adding that stupid fucking prologue speech where they give away the whole, like, spoiler of the film was such a terrible idea. Because yeah, getting immersed into the mystery and the world and figuring things out as you go along is really, I think, the appeal of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's what kind of drew me into the film. The fact that when you get to see what's going on, getting to see these strangers, as you said, as they, even visually, they're very striking in the sense of they look dead, they look like zombies and stuff, but they're talking and they're just kind of so eerie the first time that you see them. But then you get to see a little bit more of the city and how it works and how the intricacies of what their power is actually doing to this world. You start to wonder yourself, like, okay, cool, so either this is a simulation or there's something bigger afoot. And by the time that you get to the actual reveal of the film, it's just kind of like, okay, that part I did not see coming. You can see a lot of things coming your way because there's these identifiable tropes from noir films that you can see, or detective films. It's just like, okay, solving the case of, okay, did this guy actually do it or he didn't do it? Who's the real bad guy and stuff like that. But once you get to the end, you're like, oh, okay, this movie just took a whole heel turn.
Well,
But it's
yeah,
good.
the film it is kind of like a puzzle, but not in like a really like crazy esoteric, like it's not like a David Lynch film, like
Yeah.
it is a film that you figure out as you go along. Like you're sort of put into the mindset of the main character, John Murdoch. He awakes in this motel room naked in a bathtub, and he has no idea who he really is, but he finds the dead body of a woman in the room with him, which obviously would shock him, shock anybody. But yeah, we're playing with this kind of familiar idea of the amnesiac protagonist waking up and the uncertainty and, not even knowing his own identity. And from there, we use that as a jumping off point to kind of get deeper into these concepts. And as he starts piecing things together, we do as well as the audience. And it works well because even though the film is dealing with some surprisingly deep sci-fi concepts, it's interesting because on one hand, like it's kind of a unique take on things, like the idea of like space aliens and stuff like that has been done a lot before. So it's like, how do you kind of get an interesting, unique take on this? So you have this idea of these almost like these energy beings, like these parasitic beings that have taken over human corpses and have these psychic abilities. And it's also kind of a technological thing because they have this big machine built underground, and they do this thing called the tuning, where they essentially put everyone in the city to sleep and they just alter reality. They can literally alter reality at will, and they change everything. Like they change, so people in the city are basically living different lives, like from night to night, and continuously changing their identities and becoming different people. And it's all kind of in service of an experiment that these strangers are doing on humanity. And that alone is kind of like really like high like concept stuff, and it leads into a lot of like the concept of identity and memory, and these people being forced to kind of live out these false lives that are constantly changing, and how that would lead to like certain people beginning to suspect, like the character, the partner who's having the kind of mental breakdown, I feel is a good example of that, of just beginning to see things and just how that kind of fucks with your perception and drives you into madness because you can't reconcile it. Like the harder he works at trying to figure out, the more it just drives him insane.
That's what I like about this film, is that there are three key scenes I find for me where I was able to kind of figure that, okay, this is what is this movie type posing as a question type of thing, right? So the first one is, of course, the guy doesn't have a memory and he's meeting the doctor for the first time, and then you get to see the partner or the detective, William Hurt,
Yeah.
basically Bumstead, basically going about trying to figure out this case. And then he's like, okay, we're going to have to talk to the ex-partner, the guy who you said that went crazy. But you get to see his office, and we get to see the spiral and stuff. And then for me, that first posed the question of like, okay, either this is a time loop or there's something where it's just like something is in repetition, basically.
Yeah.
And then you get to see it's like the whole city just
Yeah.
basically shuts
It's a
down.
construction, you know. The
Exactly.
whole city is a construction that the strangers have made, basically like a habitat for the humans. And they even say like it's a an amalgamation of different periods and eras and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
that too allows them to do interesting things with like the architecture and the style of the film. You know, some of it is like has that 40s aesthetic, but some of it is more modern and weird. Like just that, like really visually inventive, good ideas, good conceptual stuff. And like when you're playing with ideas like this, it runs the risk of becoming like cheesy or just being poorly done. So it definitely needs to be. So you really need a good sense of like atmosphere and visual flair to pull it off. You need to really kind of commit to this idea of a changing world and really kind of flesh it out. And I feel like they did that. And Alex Proyas, he's really effective at creating atmosphere and just the darkness. Like obviously the title Dark City is very fitting because we're in this city that's completely always like set in perpetual nighttime. And obviously once we find out the grand revelation later on in the film where the city is actually a construct floating in space, which is probably one of the best scene in the film where they get to this enigmatic place, Shell Beach, which is the location that the protagonist keeps hearing about, and everybody knows about it, but nobody seems to remember the way to get there. So they finally get there and realize it's just like a billboard, like it's just a fake sign.
Mm.
So when they break through that, they bust through the wall and they just see the endless space out there, and that's kind of the big moment where you're like, oh fuck, and it really all comes together, you know.
Exactly.
So just like that, and just this kind of really having these grand sci-fi ideas, but being able to back them up with like good filmmaking, like it's really effective. It's a good film, and the acting is good. Like Rufus Sewell does a good job. He's an actor that he's actually mostly known for playing like villains. He's played a lot of bad guys, so it's good to see him playing more like a heroic role. And it also adds to the illusion, like the confusion of the film, because when we first meet him, we're under the impression that he's potentially a serial killer. So, you know, having an actor like that adds to the whole uncertainty, like, is he actually doing this or not? And, you know, Jennifer Connelly in one of her great early roles playing the wife, she does her own singing in the director's cut. In the theatrical cut, they had her replaced, but she does some pretty good singing in the film. And I really like William Hurt as well as the kind of jaded old detective who he's kind of starts seeing through it too. Like at first he's on the case trying to get this John Murdoch guy, but he starts suspecting enough to actually like listen to him and go along with the craziness of it all. And a great performance by Kiefer Sutherland as well, who originally I think wasn't even intended to play this role. He kind of got the screenplay by mistake and ended up liking it and auditioning for it, and he gives a very kind of unique and idiosyncratic performance as this kind of messed up like doctor. He's basically been the pawn of the strangers for so long. They use him to implant people with false memories, and he's kind of key to their whole scheme. But you can see that it's kind of taken a toll on him, and he's all like crazy and neurotic. Like, you know, great little kind of ticks and additions to the character, like, and a different kind of, not the kind of character you would expect Kiefer Sutherland to play. So it's cool that he was willing to kind of step out of that and try something different. Mm. And of course, Richard O'Brien, he plays the kind of main bad guy in a way, the Mr. Hand, who is the kind of, in a way, his name is fitting because he's the right-hand man of like the big boss, Mr. Book. Mm. And he takes a really kind of personal interest in this conflict with John Murdoch. And at one point, he even, in order to adequately sort of track him down and stop him, he injects himself with the kind of false memory imprint that they were planning to give him so he can sort of like anticipate him and get closer to him. And yeah, Richard O'Brien gives a really sinister performance. Like he really gets into the spirit of it, the creepiness.
See, that goes into my second point of why this movie kind of is really great for me. the point where Richard O'Brien's character, the Mr. Hand, puts the memory into his brain and basically becomes this character that this guy was supposed to be, because this whole point of the whole thing is implanting memories to figure out what does the human soul mean, you know?
Yeah, and that's yeah, they want to figure out the soul and kind of the spirit to our endurance because they're dying out.
Mhm.
And again, like I said, it's a cool kind of take on an alien, you know, like not doing like a kind of silly rubber suit, but instead having these things be truly kind of bizarre and alien creatures. Like in their true form, they're completely different from us, and that's why they have to kind of use dead bodies as hosts to even exist in our world and be able to interact with us.
So from there, you get to see the actual question of this one doctor. They erased all his past memories, but kept the type of thing that he actually understood about the human analogy and the anatomy and the human mind type of thing.
Yeah.
So when you get to see this character at the end of the film, after he's defeated the big bad guy with a really cool technique of just implanting memories of like getting ready for this one big battle, the question that Richard O'Brien character says is like, how could we not basically figure you guys out? And the guy goes just like, well, you kind of just looked in the wrong place, because you got to think about it. Is the human nature part logical, or is it part of the emotion behind your intent? Because this guy decided to just, instead of living the life that predestined for him to have, he decided, you know what, I'm just going to be my own character. From
Well, yeah, the main character, John Murdoch, is really fascinating because in a way, he almost becomes this ubermensch figure, and the key thing to his character is he develops the ability to tune, much like the strangers themselves have, so he himself is able to kind of shift reality and alter the things around him as well, but he doesn't have, like, proper training. He's not skilled with it, so he's not quite as efficient as they are. So he's kind of discovering his own power. Like, we have that typical hero's journey where the character is learning more about his own ability and growing in power and stuff like that. But like you said, there's the great scene at the end where he's kind of gearing up for the final confrontation, and the Dr. Schreiber, the Kiefer Sutherland character, just basically injects him with all the memories he's going to need, like giving him all the information in order to harness this power and defeat these guys. So that's kind of a cool take on almost like the training montage, like literally having it be like a montage of memories. That's kind of a clever idea. But yeah, beneath all that kind of like standard hero, like power up thing, like, because there is almost like an anime thing to it with like him literally ascending into godhood. But it's also playing with, and another thing I like, they never really explain how he developed the ability to tune. Like, they say it's almost like an evolutionary thing. Like, he says, oh, he's evolved. But I think it's almost like the result of their experiments. Like, there's an ironic thing with they were experimenting on humans for so many times, trying to make them, for so long, so often, that they were trying to make themselves more human, but they ended up fucking it up, and instead they made humanity more like them. Like they ended up having the reverse effect, so John ends up becoming more like them and developing their ability. But yeah, playing with this idea of identity, because, like, who are these people, really? All their memories are fake. And again, like, if you want to look, like, deeper into it, like, how did they even get into this city in the first place? Like, the writers had, like, different theories on that. Like, apparently Alex Proyas believes that they were actually space travelers who were probably on some sort of spacecraft, and they were abducted by the strangers and placed in this simulation, this false kind of city. But David Goyer, who also wrote the screenplay, he takes a more kind of spiritual thing, and he sees it more as a purgatorial kind of thing.
Which I saw as well.
Yeah, that's another kind of metaphor you can apply to it. So... Yeah. But yeah, like, these people, I guess, presumably were people at some point. Like, maybe they came from Earth, they had, like, families and memories of their own and definite lives. But then that kind of gets scrambled when all of a sudden you're being given a new life and a new identity, and time is constantly shifting and changing around you. And he says, like, that final scene that John has with Mr. Hand, and he tells him, like, you think you're me, but you're not. Like, that's the person you thought I was, like the person you intended me to be, but that's not who I am.
Well, Well, that's one thing about human nature in real life is that you can hear so much about somebody, even a celebrity or something like that, but when you actually meet them, they're a completely different person than what
Well,
your
yeah, like
perspective
that
is like.
that thing that's hard to quantify, like that thing that
Mm-hmm.
the strangers were looking for and unable to find.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the movie almost has like that idea of the search for identity, and like that becomes like John's true power in a sense. Like yeah, he does develop this tuning ability and rises to almost like godlike power at the end of the story. Because by the end of the film, he's destroyed all of the strangers pretty much. Mr. Hand is still around, but it's implied that he's going to die very soon because even just the imprint of John's memories is almost toxic to him. It's slowly killing him.
Mm-hmm.
So now John is the only one left here with any power, so it ends in a kind of ambiguous way with him. And there's this whole idea of Shell Beach. At the end of the film, he creates it. He uses his power to create it, and he finally brings like sun to the world. So it ends on kind of this more optimistic kind of thing, I think. And like even the marriage, like his relationship with his wife, by the end of the film he's lost that because they gave her a new identity. They reprogrammed her essentially, and now that he's destroyed everything, there's no way to kind of bring her back to the person she used to be. So in the end he sort of leaves it up to fate. He creates this Shell Beach and they meet there, so it's implied that their relationship will blossom, but this time it'll be real. And again, like his power was to he developed a tuning power and he was able to shape the world, but really in some ways his real power was being able to create his own identity. Like now he's going to be his own person, and instead of it being manufactured and fake. So it's a great movie because it has like that typical kind of hero becomes he develops the skill, he beats the bad guys, the villains, the antagonists, but it ends on a really kind of fascinating open end where you're like, okay, well, on one hand, these people are all still floating around in space in this weird artificial city,
Mm-hmm.
but they have this one guy here who's essentially their god in a way. So, like, what's he gonna do? Like, what is he gonna do next? Is he gonna be benevolent? Is he gonna fall maybe into evil the way the strangers did? Because who knows? Maybe the strangers had benevolent intentions at first too, but they got too much into it. Like, is he gonna try to get them back to Earth? Like, what's gonna happen next? So, that just leaves like a really kind of interesting, open ended just idea for people to ruminate on. And I'm glad that they didn't really think of making a sequel, because you could theoretically make one, but like, you don't want to push it. You just want to leave it on that beautiful ending where the audience is just left wondering, well, what's going to happen next? And you can sort of make up your own mind.
Yeah, I could see a lot of fan fiction about the sequel of, maybe people living on the city and more people awakening to the fact that they are on a floating city or something.
Yeah.
The fact, for me, what really draws me into this film is that, again, this whole idea of identity is, does identity make the soul or does the soul make identity? The interchangeable idea of where do we lie in this whole vast cosmos and
Yeah.
shit, and like,
And yeah,
you
maybe that was part of the Stranger's experiments. Like, if we break down a person's identity enough and just break down their self and their being, like, what will sort of emerge.
and
yeah,
John
that's
Murdoch was the answer.
exactly. He was kind of the end result of the experiment, and ironically kind of doomed them all. Like, that's kind of how I see the movie. But yeah, it's like really brilliant sci-fi concepts that are being illustrated in a really kind of creative and thought-provoking way. Great filmmaking, great acting. Like, I prefer this movie to The Matrix. Like, to me, The Matrix was always kind of like, The Matrix was a hype. Like, it was a pop culture thing. It was really big at the time, and like, yeah, it was cool for what it was, but looking back on it, there's a lot of stuff that's cheesy. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't hold up. There's a lot of stuff that the Wachowskis took from other sources, even possibly this film, who knows, because this one did come out first. Like, The Matrix came out shortly after, so The Matrix was probably already on its way to being made when this film came out, but who knows, like, maybe they got to look at an early draft or something. But this film just feels kind of more original and more audacious and more just visually bold. And, like, it's not necessarily focused on, like, overlong action scenes, but more just on the atmosphere and the feel and texture of the world, and really kind of bringing these ideas to the fore and communicating it to the audience visually and having it just work, like, because when you're setting yourself up for a movie like this really ambitious idea of like, oh, like reality is shifting in this kind of artificial world, like that alone is a difficult concept to sell to the audience effectively without it coming across as silly or cheesy. So just the way the film is framed and built up, and like I said, that moment where they finally break through to like the wall and see space, like just the way the movie really builds up to that moment, that's what makes it such a jaw-dropping, like, holy fuck, like, just really effective filmmaking, not just flashy visuals, not just high concept, like, everything coming together into a really solid whole.
That's why I still say that this film, for me at least, resembles Alice in Wonderland, where John Murdoch is Alice, and you get to see this really weird, wonky world, and basically he's trying to see through the looking
glass. Yeah, there's that kind of that classical structure. Like there is an identifiable like structure to the film, but it rises above that and it takes these ideas, like, it's the old quote, it's not where you take the idea from, it's where you take it to. So just like taking these ideas of reality and like identity and the hero's journey and putting them in this kind of sci-fi film noir kind of context. It was a really brilliant stroke of genius. And yeah, the film I think it's gotten more recognition as the years have gone on. More people recognize it kind of as this brilliant little gem, but it is kind of sad that this film fell through the cracks. It did have its champions. Like I said, Roger Ebert loved this film. He recorded a whole commentary for it, and he used it in his courses, like to teach film students. He would deconstruct the film and stuff. So it definitely has its champions, but it's kind of a bummer that it didn't hit as hard as it should have when it came out.
That's why, for me, I'm giving this movie a 5 out of 5 rating, just because the interesting point that she pointed out of The Matrix coming out a year after, I could see the clear differences between them, even though they say the same idea of like identity inside this type of, not simulation, but this fabricated world.
Yeah, fabricated world, the illusion, seeing beyond it, and the protagonist kind of developing powers that allow him to sort of break through. And
but the thing is that what this movie does is more simplifies how it says it.
It's more subtle. It's more classy. Yeah, The Matrix is right in your face and makes it really obvious. Like, I know kung fu and shit like that. Give me a helicopter. Just dial it in there. Give us all the guns. Like, this film is much more kind of arty and, like, subtle with the way it approaches it and, like, the way he has to master his power and the journey he takes. It's a really fine film. And, yeah, this is going to be one of those times where we agree. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 myself. Because I feel like this is one of those kind of great classics of its time that just didn't really get the regard it deserves, and still holds up beautifully to this day. A film I would recommend to anyone who's into like sci-fi or like crazy out there stuff. Like, this is one that's definitely worth checking out.
Until then, this has been Film on High.
Peace.
Later.